When I came back from Florida, the air felt different. I had spent 2 quiet weeks with my cousin Helen, soaking in the sun, laughing over old memories, and letting my body rest for the first time in years. But as I turned onto my street that afternoon, something inside me shifted. The neighborhood looked the same: children riding their bikes, dogs barking behind fences, the same sweet smell of orange blossoms, but when I stopped in front of my house, a strange unease wrapped around me. I reached into my purse, pulled out my familiar key, and felt an odd chill crawl up my spine. The house stood there, perfectly still. Yet, something about it didn't feel like mine anymore. I pushed the key into the lock, twisted it, and stopped. It didn't turn. I tried again. Harder this time, jiggling it from side to side, but it refused to budge. My heartbeat quickened. My palms began to sweat. I stepped back, stared at the door, then tried again, as if effort alone could make it obey. The sound of the key grinding against the metal felt wrong. I see action savan regenis. That's when the truth hit me like a blow. Someone had changed the locks. For a moment, I just stood there on the porch, frozen in disbelief. My heart pounded so fast I could hear it in my ears. This was my home. The one I had built with 40 years of work, of sacrifice, of cleaning offices until my hands bled. My chest tightened. A sharp, suffocating ache spreading through me. I took a shaky breath and knocked on the door. The knock echoed inside, hollow and unfamiliar. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, confident, and the sound of my own floorboards beneath someone else's feet. The door opened, and there she was, Emily, my daughter-in-law. Her expression was calm, almost casual, but her eyes were cold. For years, she had greeted me with warmth, with a smile that could light up a room. But this time, her lips curved in something that wasn't kindness. It was control. "Mother-in-law," she said softly, as if testing the word. I blinked, trying to understand. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone light, but her gaze sharp. My throat tightened. I told her I had just come back from my trip and was trying to open the door. But the lock wouldn't turn. She tilted her head slightly, that same polite smile never leaving her face, and said, "Oh, yes. We changed the locks." My stomach dropped. "We," I repeated, my voice trembling. She leaned against the doorway, her hand resting casually on the frame, her wedding ring glinting in the sunlight. "Robert and I have made some changes while you were away. This is our home now." The words didn't make sense. Our home. I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. I looked past her shoulder and caught a glimpse of my living room, my furniture, my pictures, but something was off. The photos of my parents were gone, replaced by framed portraits of her and Robert. The soft blue curtains I had chosen years ago had been replaced by something sleek and gray. It was like staring into a distorted version of my life. I took a step forward, but she didn't move aside. The smile on her face sharpened. "You can't stay here anymore," she said simply. "It's time for things to change." For a moment, all I could do was stare at her. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to stay calm. I reminded her that the deed was in my name, that I paid the taxes, that I owned every inch of this property. But she only shrugged, her expression unmoved. "Things are different now," she said, her voice low, smooth, almost rehearsed. We've taken care of the paperwork. It's all legal. My mouth went dry. Behind her, I saw movement. Robert, my son, standing in the hallway. My only child. His face was pale, his eyes downcast, as if he couldn't bear to meet mine. Robert, I whispered. Relief flooding me. Tell her she's mistaken. Tell her this is my home. He didn't answer. He just stood there, shifting awkwardly, avoiding my gaze. My heart cracked open in my chest. The silence between us screamed louder than any words could. That silence told me everything I needed to know. He had known. He had helped. My own son. The world around me blurred. I felt dizzy, like the ground was slipping away beneath my feet. My mind flashed through decades of memories, him as a little boy with scraped knees. His laughter echoing through this very house. The nights I stayed up, sewing his clothes. And the mornings I skipped breakfast so he could have enough for lunch. Every sacrifice I had ever made condensed into this one crushing moment. My throat burned. But then something inside me shifted. The fear didn't vanish, it transformed. It hardened. I looked at them both, Emily with her smug confidence, Robert with his cowardice, and felt a calmness wash over me. Cold and clear. I reached into my purse and pulled out the cell phone Robert had given me last year. He had said it was to keep me connected. I smiled faintly, though it didn't reach my eyes. You're right. Emily? I said softly. Things have changed. She frowned, confused by my tone. Yes. I continued. It's time you learned who really runs this family. For the first time. She hesitated. Her brow furrowed. Her lips parted. But no words came out. She didn't understand why I wasn't crying. Why I wasn't begging to be let back in. That's when I realized something simple but powerful. When a woman smiles after losing everything, it's not because she's broken, it's because she's done being afraid. I turned and walked down those steps slowly, each one steady, deliberate. Behind me, I could hear her voice calling my name, but I didn't look back. The wind lifted my hair, cool against my face, and I whispered to myself that they had taken my house, but not my power. What they didn't know was that I was just getting started. I walked for blocks without knowing where I was going. My body moving, but my mind trapped somewhere between disbelief and anger. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the quiet street. The same street I had lived on for decades. And yet now it felt foreign. The houses I passed looked untouched by betrayal. Neat gardens and wind chimes swaying gently in the breeze, while my own world had just fallen apart. When I finally stopped, I found myself sitting on a park bench beneath a jacaranda tree. Its purple blossoms were falling all around me, delicate and silent, landing on my lap as if to comfort me. I sat there for a long time, letting the truth sink in. My son had locked me out of my own home. The boy I raised with every ounce of my strength had stood behind a woman who looked me in the eyes and told me I didn't belong anymore. The ache in my chest spread until it felt hard to breathe. My hands shook as I reached into my purse and found an old photograph Robert at 5 years old, holding a paper airplane, his smile wide and free. I stared at it until my vision blurred. That house wasn't just a building. It was the story of us. I had bought it penny by penny, built it room by room through sheer willpower. I had scrubbed bathrooms and polished floors until my skin cracked. I had cleaned offices long after midnight, pushing heavy vacuums through endless hallways. Every dollar I saved went into that house. 40 years of labor, of hunger, of sleepless nights. That key, the one that no longer fit the lock, represented my entire life. When Robert's father left us, I was 27 and terrified. I remember the morning. Clearly, he walked out with a suitcase and a promise he never kept. Rent was due. Bills piled high. And I had a little boy who needed to eat. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. I took whatever jobs I could find. In the mornings, I scrubbed the floors of a bakery downtown. The steam burned my hands. But I never complained. From 9 to 6. I cleaned the offices of an insurance company, 30 rooms, 6 bathrooms, 3 floors. By night, I took on extra work at 2 medical offices and a law firm, returning home past midnight only to wake again at 5. People used to tell me I was crazy, that no one could live like that. But I did, because I had Robert. I saved every penny I could. No new clothes. No vacations. No fancy meals. Just savings. Every coin I dropped into that jar was a promise to my son, a promise that one day we would have a place of our own. After 15 years of that cycle, I had $95,000. 10 years later, I had $180,000. Enough to buy that house outright. I still remember the day I signed the deed. My hands were trembling. Not from exhaustion, but from pride. For the first time, I had something that no one could take away. Or so I thought. I bought that house not just for me, but for Robert. I imagined his future there: birthdays, dinners, laughter. I dreamed of the day he would bring his own family, and how I'd cook his favorite meals and watch his children play in the garden. That house was my legacy. The physical proof of every sacrifice. And to think, after all that, I had handed it to them freely. I had let them move in temporarily. The word Robert used. He said they just needed time to save for their own place. Of course, I believed him. I always believed him. Love makes fools out of mothers. I leaned back on the bench and closed my eyes. The wind brushing my face gently. And I realized something I had refused to admit until that moment. It wasn't Emily who had truly betrayed me. It was Robert. She was just the catalyst. He was the one who let her turn our home into her kingdom. He was the one who stood by silently while she erased me from every room, every corner of my life. The realization burned deep, but under that pain, another feeling began to grow: resolve. I had worked too hard and come too far to let this be the end of my story. I wasn't going to let them rewrite it. The sun was beginning to set, turning the sky gold and pink. I stood up slowly, wiped the dust from my hands, and took one last look at the street that had once felt like mine. I whispered to myself that I had survived worse. And it was true. I had survived hunger, abandonment, exhaustion, and loneliness. Losing a house, even my house, would not destroy me. I turned away from it all and began to walk toward the bus stop. My heart heavy, but my steps steady. I didn't know what I would do yet. But I knew one thing for certain. They had started a battle they weren't ready to finish. The bus ride that evening was long and silent. I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker past, my reflection staring back at me from the glass. My eyes looked tired, older than I remembered. But there was something else in them too: steel. The kind that comes when you have nothing left to lose. The rhythm of the bus over the road sounded like a heartbeat, steady and unrelenting. And I found myself thinking back to the early days in that house. I could still hear Robert's laughter echoing through the hallway, the smell of cookies baking in the kitchen, the hum of the old fan that used to squeak on summer nights. Those memories used to bring warmth, but now they felt like ghosts, haunting me with what I had lost. When the bus stopped near a small diner, I decided to get off. I walked in and ordered a cup of coffee, black and strong. The place was nearly empty, the kind of quiet that feels almost sacred. I sat at a corner table, hands wrapped around the cup, and tried to think clearly. What had happened wasn't just a misunderstanding or a cruel twist of fate. It was planned. The locks, the paperwork, the tone in Emily's voice, all of it had been carefully rehearsed. She had been waiting for that moment, and Robert had let it happen. That thought cut deeper than anything else. I remembered the day he brought Emily home for the first time. It was a bright Sunday afternoon. He had called me in advance, telling me he'd met someone special. When they arrived, she had flowers in her hands and a smile that could charm anyone. She hugged me, complimented the house, said it felt warm and full of love. I believed her. Over the next few months, she came by often, helped me cook, asked for my advice, listened to my stories. She called me Mom. I thought I had gained a daughter. I even spent $8,000 of my savings on their wedding, just to see my son happy. That night, when I handed them the deed as a symbolic gesture, a way of saying, "This is your home too," I thought I was doing something beautiful. I didn't know I was handing them the weapon they'd later use to wound me. As I sat in that diner, the bitter taste of coffee on my tongue, I realized how blind I had been. Love had made me generous, but it had also made me vulnerable. I had trusted too easily, given too freely. Emily's kindness had been a mask, and behind it, there had been ambition. Maybe she had loved Robert once. Maybe she still did. But I knew now that she loved power more. And Robert, my poor son, had become her willing accomplice. The waitress refilled my cup and asked if I was all right. I nodded, even though my chest felt like it was being crushed from the inside. I thanked her, left a tip, and stepped back out into the night. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of rain. The streets shimmered under the streetlights, and I walked with no destination, letting the movement calm me. I wasn't ready to give up. Somewhere deep inside me, beneath the exhaustion and heartbreak, something fierce was waking up. By the time I reached the small motel near the bus station, my plan wasn't clear yet. But the intention was. I checked in with the little money I had in my purse and sat on the edge of the bed, the sound of traffic humming outside the window. I stared at my reflection in the mirror above the dresser, my hair slightly out of place. My eyes shadowed but alive. For decades, people had looked at me and seen a simple woman, a mother, a cleaner, someone quiet, harmless. They were wrong. I took out my phone, the one Robert had given me last year, and stared at the dark screen for a long moment. The irony wasn't lost on me. At the same device he had bought so I could stay connected would now be the tool I'd use to fight back. I opened the Notes app and began typing everything I could remember: dates, conversations, changes around the house, the day they replaced my furniture, the morning the locks were changed. Every detail mattered. Every memory could become evidence. As I typed, something shifted in my chest. The pain was still there, but it was turning into focus. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I was going to take my life back. My house, my dignity, everything. They thought they had erased me, but they had only awakened the part of me that had built an entire life from nothing. I put the phone down, lay back on the bed, and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I would start over, not as the mother who lost her home, but as the woman who was going to reclaim it. I woke up before dawn in that small motel room. The hum of an old air conditioner breaking the silence. For a moment, I forgot where I was. The rough texture of the sheets and the smell of detergent tricking me into thinking I was home. But then it all came back. The lock, Emily's smirk, Robert's downcast eyes. My stomach twisted. But instead of tears, something colder filled me. Determination. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor until the light outside shifted from gray to gold. I had been knocked down before, but this time I wasn't staying there. I got dressed, pulled my hair back, and went down to the diner next door for breakfast. And the same waitress from last night greeted me with a tired smile and poured me a cup of coffee. As I ate, I started writing in my notebook again. This time, not just details of what had happened, but memories of how I got here. I wanted to remind myself who I was, not the woman they thought they could manipulate, but the one who had built an entire life from scraps. I listed every job ID ever taken. The bakery, the offices, the hospitals. Each one was proof that I could survive anything. I wrote until my hand cramped. And when I stopped, I looked down at the page and felt a flicker of strength return. After breakfast, I walked to the nearest bus stop, not sure where I was heading. The city was already awake, cars honking, people rushing, the air filled with that restless hum of ordinary life. I blended into the crowd, invisible, and for the first time, that anonymity comforted me. I wasn't a victim. I was a ghost, free to move without being noticed. I decided to start by visiting the courthouse to confirm the status of my property. It was time to see what they had really done. The clerk at the property office was polite but detached, clicking through the computer as I handed over my ID and address. After a few minutes, she frowned and said something that made my pulse race. The deed was still in my name, but there had been inquiries, requests for documents, verification forms, even a pending note for a potential transfer. Someone had been preparing to move the ownership without my knowledge. I felt heat crawl up my neck, anger sharp and clean. I thanked her, took the printed report, and walked outside. The sky was overcast, heavy with clouds, but inside me, the storm was already raging. I sat on a bench outside the courthouse, staring at the paper. It was proof that Emily wasn't just cruel. She was calculated. She wanted everything. My house, my money, my peace. And Robert, whether through weakness or greed, was letting her. But now I had something she didn't expect. Awareness. I wasn't in the dark anymore. I wasn't standing on the porch, confused and broken. I knew exactly what they were doing. The first drops of rain began to fall. Light at first, then heavier. People around me ran for cover, but I stayed seated, letting the water soak through my jacket. It cooled the heat in my chest, washed away the last traces of helplessness. I whispered to myself that I had faced worse storms and survived them all. This one would be no different. By the time I returned to the motel, the rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and clean. I changed into dry clothes and stood in front of the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, tired eyes, gray strands in my hair, but something unshakable behind them. I reached for the phone and called the only person I trusted completely. Linda, my oldest friend. When she answered, I didn't even have to explain. She heard it in my voice. She told me to come stay with her. Said we'd figure it out together. I hesitated for only a second before agreeing. I packed my bag, slipped the property report into my purse, and left the key on the nightstand. That evening, as the bus carried me across town toward Linda's neighborhood, the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and crimson. I pressed my hand against the window and made myself a promise. They thought they had ended my story, but they had only written the beginning of the part where I fight back. I would go to Linda's, gather my strength, and then return, not as the woman they locked out, but as the woman who would take everything back piece by piece. Linda lived on the other side of the city, in a quiet neighborhood lined with tall sycamore trees. When I arrived, she was already standing on her porch waiting for me, arms crossed, her face a mix of concern and fierce loyalty. We had known each other since our 20s, back when we worked at the same cleaning company. We had survived life's storms, together, bad bosses, bad men, bad luck, but nothing as cruel as what I was facing now. She didn't say anything at first. She just pulled me into a hug that broke the dam inside me. For a moment, I let myself cry, not the weak, helpless kind of tears, but the kind that clear the way for what comes next. She led me inside, and I sat at her kitchen table while she brewed tea, the smell of chamomile filling the air. Her house was small but warm, full of little things that reminded me of who we were before life got complicated. A faded photo of us on the wall, both of us young and laughing, covered in flour from a baking disaster that had turned into one of our favorite memories. When she finally sat down, I told her everything about the lock, the confrontation, Robert's silence, the courthouse. Her expression didn't change as I spoke, but her hand tightened around her cup. When I finished, she let out a slow breath and said, "You're not crazy, Martha. They're planning something bigger." I nodded. I already knew. Changing the locks was just the first step. They wanted everything: my home, my savings, maybe even the inheritance I hadn't yet touched. The thought made my stomach twist, but it also gave me clarity. Linda listened carefully, then leaned forward and said something simple but powerful. "If they want a war, you give them one. But you do it smart. No shouting. No begging. Evidence. Martha. Proof." Her words echoed what the woman at the courthouse had said. I reached for my purse and pulled out the report, sliding it across the table. She scanned it quickly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This isn't enough to stop them," she said quietly. "But it's a start. You need to catch them in their lies. Make them expose themselves." We spent the rest of the night talking, planning. Linda's mind was sharp, precise. She told me we could use her old recording equipment, the one she had from her days running the neighborhood association. I could pretend to make peace with Emily, visit the house, play the role of the forgetful old woman they already thought I was. While I acted harmless, I'd be collecting every word, every detail, every slip of the tongue. I hesitated. The idea of going back into that house, pretending to forgive them, felt unbearable. But Linda's voice was steady. She told me that I had survived much harder things than deception. This was just another kind of cleaning sweeping out the lies instead of dirt. I smiled faintly at that. It sounded like something only she would say. When the clock struck midnight, she walked me to the guest room and left the door open a little, like she used to when I stayed over years ago. The small gesture made my chest ache. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the quiet ticking of her old wall clock filling the darkness. Every sound reminded me that time was still moving, that I wasn't stuck in the moment they betrayed me. I was already moving forward. Before sleep finally came, I whispered to myself the same words I had said the day I bought my house. You built your life once. You can do it again. And this time, I would build it stronger. Not out of faith in others, but out of faith in myself. The next morning, sunlight spilled across Linda's kitchen table, glinting off the teapot shed owned for decades. I sat there sipping coffee while she wrote a list of things we needed. A small recorder, extra batteries, a safe place to store everything. She had that same calm focus ID seen in her years ago when life tried to break her too. Watching her steadiness reminded me that strength doesn't always roar, it can whisper and plan quietly. One step at a time. After breakfast, we went to a small electronics shop, a few blocks away. The man behind the counter was young, barely older than my grandson would have been if it ever had one. He asked what we needed, and Linda did most of the talking. We left with 2 tiny recorders that could fit into my palm, nearly invisible. Holding one felt strange, like holding a secret that could change everything. Back at her house, we practiced using them. She taught me how to slide the switch without making noise, how to check if the light was on, how to hide it inside a purse or a coat pocket. We laughed once when I fumbled with the buttons, and for the first time in weeks, the sound didn't feel foreign. It reminded me of who I had been before the betrayal. Someone capable, clever, alive. By midday, my plan started to take shape. I would go back to the house, not as a victim, but as a visitor, pretending to make peace. I'd tell Emily that I missed Robert, that I wanted to smooth things over, maybe even suggest that we start fresh. I knew her well enough to predict her reaction. Shed 1. And in that confidence, she would talk too much. Every arrogant word would end up recorded. That evening, I sat in Linda's living room and wrote a list of my own. It wasn't for supplies, it was a reminder of who I was fighting for. I wrote down every sacrifice. Working double shifts, skipping meals, saving for Robert's school, patching his shoes instead of buying new ones, hiding my exhaustion behind a smile. Each line steadied me. By the time I finished, my hand ached, but my heart felt lighter. I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for the life behind it. Later, as the sky darkened, Linda poured us both tea. She said she admired my courage, but I told her it wasn't courage, it was necessity. When someone tries to erase you, surviving becomes the only choice. She nodded and reached over, squeezing my hand gently. I could see pride in her eyes, but also worry. She told me to be careful, to remember that people like Emily don't stop when they're cornered, they dig deeper. I promised her I'd be cautious, though deep down, I already knew there would be risks. That night, I packed my purse carefully. Recorder, notebook, a pen, and the property document. I laid everything out like armor before a battle. I stared at my reflection in the mirror for a long moment. I didn't look like the woman I used to be. There were new lines around my eyes. Yes, but there was also something fierce behind them. The kind of fire that only comes from being tested and refusing to break. When I finally lay down, sleep came slowly. My mind kept circling back to Robert. Somewhere beneath the layers of betrayal, I still wanted to believe he could be saved, that the boy who once brought me flowers for Mother's Day still existed. But love couldn't blind me anymore. I had to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Before I drifted off, I whispered into the darkness. Tomorrow I go back. Let her think she's won. Let her open the door with that smug little smile, Because this time, I'll be the one watching. The one listening. Tomorrow, the first cracks in her perfect mask will begin to show. The next day felt heavier than usual, as if the air itself knew something was about to change. I woke early, sat at the edge of the bed, and watched the light crawl slowly across the floorboards. My heart was steady, though a quiet ache pulsed beneath every breath. Linda was already awake, waiting at the kitchen table with toast and coffee. She didn't say much, just handed me the small recorder and reminded me where the switch was. When I slipped it into my purse, I felt its weight, not physical, but moral. It was a small thing that could hold the truth of everything that had been stolen from me. I dressed carefully, choosing a soft gray cardigan, one that made me look gentle, harmless, the way Emily expected me to be. The trick, Linda said, was to make them comfortable enough to drop their guard. I wasn't going there to fight. Not yet. I was going there to listen. When I reached my street, my pulse quickened. Every step closer to that house made my chest tighten. The garden looked the same, but someone had trimmed the roses I planted years ago. My welcome mat was gone. The front window, once covered by my lace curtains, now had sleek white blinds that looked sterile and cold. Still, I climbed the porch stairs, pressed the doorbell, and waited. Emily opened the door with that same polished smile. But I caught the flash of surprise before she hit it. "Mother-in-law," she said sweetly. What a surprise. I told her I'd been thinking about everything, that I wanted to make peace. I even mentioned that I missed Robert and didn't want tension in the family anymore. Her eyes softened just enough to believe me. She stepped aside and invited me in. To the moment I crossed that threshold, my heart clenched. The scent of my lavender candles was gone, replaced by some expensive perfume. My photos were nowhere to be seen. The couch where Robert used to fall asleep as a child was gone too. Every trace of me had been erased. I forced a smile, pretending not to notice, and sat where she gestured. The recorder in my purse was already running. We chatted about trivial things at first: her job, the neighborhood, even the weather. But slowly, she began steering the conversation toward the house. She said things like, "Robert and I have worked so hard to make this place our own." She spoke with such entitlement that my fingers itched to tighten around my cup. But I kept my face calm. When she mentioned the new paperwork, I tilted my head and asked innocently, "What paperwork, dear?" She smiled, careful but too proud to hide it completely, and said it was just something her cousin Javier, the lawyer, had helped them with to make things easier. I nodded, pretending to be confused, asking gentle questions that made her explain more. The words poured out how they'd been planning to update the ownership documents, how they wanted to ensure the house stayed in the family, and how they would handle all my dad's complicated finances when I got older. Every word was being recorded. Every lie was becoming evidence. After an hour, Robert came home. His face lit up with surprise when he saw me sitting there. He hesitated, then smiled weakly. I stood up, hugged him, and whispered that I missed him. For a moment, I thought I saw guilt flicker in his eyes, but Emily's hand on his arm pulled him back into her orbit. I asked if he'd like to have dinner sometime. Just the two of us. And he said maybe, glancing at Emily for approval. That small movement told me everything I needed to know. My son no longer spoke for himself. When I finally stood to leave, Emily followed me to the door. She said she was glad I wanted peace, That it was better for everyone if I just trusted them to take care of things. I smiled, thanked her, and told her she was right. The moment the door closed behind me, I took a deep breath, one that reached all the way down to my soul. I had what I came for, a voice full of arrogance and confession stored neatly on a tiny device in my purse. As I walked down the street toward Linda's, car parked at the corner, I felt a strange calm. The house still stood behind me, proud and silent. But I no longer saw it as something lost. It was simply a battleground. And I had just won the first skirmish. That evening, back at Linda's house, we sat in the living room with the lights dimmed. The recorder between us on the coffee table. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped the switch, and Emily's voice filled the room. It was surreal, hearing her words replayed so clearly, every smug laugh, every sentence dripping with superiority. She spoke like someone untouchable, so certain she was in control. But now those same words were proof, each syllable turning into a weapon I could use. Linda listened in silence, her jaw tight, her eyes sharp with fury. When the recording ended, she reached over, squeezed my hand, and said softly, "This is enough to make the law listen." I wanted to believe her, but part of me knew Emily wouldn't stop until she had everything. She was the kind of person who thrived on manipulation. Even now, she was probably plotting her next move. I could almost hear her voice in my head, whispering that I was old, confused, irrelevant. But that was the thing about underestimating people. You never see the fire until it's burning right in front of you. We spent hours that night planning. Linda insisted we make multiple copies of the recording. One for me. One for the lawyer. One to keep hidden in her house. We labeled them carefully, slid each into a sealed envelope, and locked them in a small box under her bed. Then we began listing what else we needed: documents, witness statements, a legal timeline. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control. Every small action we took brought me closer to justice. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The sky outside the window was still pale gray, and the air carried that faint chill of early dawn. I brewed coffee quietly while Linda slept, then sat at the table with my notebook. I wrote everything I remembered from the day before, the way Emily's tone shifted when she mentioned paperwork, how Robert had looked away when I mentioned dinner, how the word trust had rolled off her tongue like poison wrapped in sugar. I wrote until the page was full, then read it back slowly. There was no sadness this time, just precision. I wasn't writing as a mother anymore. I was writing as a strategist. When Linda woke, she looked at me over her cup of tea and smiled. She said she could see something had changed in me overnight. Maybe it was the way I sat straighter, or the calm in my voice when I told her what came next. I was going back. Not today. Not tomorrow. But soon. I wanted more than one conversation on that recorder. I wanted a pattern, a trail of evidence so undeniable that no one could twist it. That week, I visited them twice more. Each time, I played my part perfectly. I let Emily think I was grateful for her help, asking innocent questions about the documents, pretending to forget details she'd told me just days earlier. She became bolder, her words looser. One afternoon, she even said that Robert and she were finally building the future they deserved. I smiled, agreed, and took another sip of tea while the recorder in my purse captured every word. The hardest part was seeing Robert up close. He avoided my eyes most of the time, as if he knew what they were doing was wrong but couldn't stop himself. Once, when Emily left the room, I reached out and touched his hand, I told him quietly that I still loved him, no matter what. He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, his face pale. When Emily came back, the moment was gone, and the wall between us grew thicker. By the end of the second week, I had hours of recordings Emily discussing her house, mentioning my bank accounts, even laughing about how old people shouldn't be handling legal documents. I went home that night and listened to each file carefully, labeling the key moments. My pen scratched across the paper, steady and firm. Every cruel word made me stronger. That night, as I sat by the window, watching the moonlight stretch across the floor, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear that had paralyzed me on that porch was gone. What replaced it was resolve, the same kind I'd felt decades ago when life forced me to survive alone. Back then, I had worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. Now, I would fight 3 times as hard to take back the home they'd tried to steal. Before going to bed, I looked at the recorder on my nightstand and whispered to myself, "She has no idea what's coming." Then I turned off the light, knowing that every hour of sleep would bring me one step closer to the day I walked back into that house, not as their victim, but as their reckoning. The morning of my final visit arrived with a strange quiet. Even the air felt tense, like it knew this day would end differently from the others. I woke before dawn, took a long shower, and stood in front of the mirror. My reflection didn't look like a woman preparing for war. But that's exactly what I was. I dressed in a soft blue blouse and my most unassuming skirt, tied my hair neatly, and slipped the recorder into my purse one last time. Before leaving, Linda stopped me at the door and hugged me tightly. Her voice was low, steady. "Remember, you're not going there to beg. You're going to finish what they started." The drive to my house felt longer than usual. Though the streets were nearly empty, I parked down the block, took a deep breath, and walked toward the place that had once been my pride and peace. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the windows with light. But the warmth didn't reach me. My heart was calm, heavy, and certain. I rang the doorbell. Emily opened the door almost immediately, surprise flickering across her face before she masked it with that same smile she always wore. "Mother-in-law. What a nice surprise. Come in." Her voice was syrupy, but her eyes betrayed annoyance. I stepped inside. The smell of coffee and new paint filled the air, masking the scent of the home I used to know. Robert was sitting at the dining table, scrolling on his phone. He looked up briefly, then looked away again. The silence between us was suffocating. Emily gestured toward the chair across from her and poured me coffee without asking. She liked pretending she was in control. I played along, thanked her softly, and sipped slowly, giving her time to talk. She didn't disappoint. She started complaining about maintenance costs, about how much work it took to keep the house in good condition. Then she mentioned something new, plans to update the ownership soon. My pulse quickened, but my voice stayed calm. "Oh," I said, feigning confusion. "I thought everything was already settled." She smirked, her tone smug. "Not quite. Javier's finalizing the documents next week. Once that's done, we won't have to worry about anything anymore." There it was, the admission I needed. I nodded, acting grateful, and told her I trusted her judgment completely. That's when she slipped her confidence, making her careless. She started explaining how it would be simpler if the property was under Robert's name, how tax benefits and legal logistics would make it easier for them to care for me. I let her speak, recording every word. When she paused, I asked the question I had been waiting for. And what happens if I don't agree? Dear. Her expression froze for a second, then softened into fake sympathy. Don't worry, she said smoothly. Robert and I will handle everything. You don't have to stress about these things anymore. I smiled at her across the table, watching her mistake my calm for compliance. In her mind, she had already won. She didn't see the small red light blinking faintly inside my purse. Robert stayed silent through most of it. But at one point, I caught him looking at me with something that almost resembled guilt. I held his gaze for a moment, searching for the boy I once knew. But he dropped his eyes quickly, and that small flicker of hope vanished. I stood up, thanked them both for their hospitality, and said I was leaving for a short trip to visit my cousin again. Emily's eyes lit up, excitement slipping through her careful mask. Oh, how nice, she said. Take all the time you need. Well, make sure everything is in order while you're gone. That was the final piece I needed. I hugged Robert before leaving, felt him stiffen, and whispered so quietly, only he could hear. One day, you'll understand what you've done. Then I turned and walked out, closing the door behind me. The morning light was brighter now. The sky, a flawless blue. But the warmth meant nothing. I didn't look back. My steps were slow but steady. Every one, a promise that this would be the last time I left my home defeated. I walked straight to Linda's car parked at the corner, opened the door, and sat down beside her. She didn't ask what had happened. She could see it in my eyes. I handed her the recorder and said simply, "We've got them." Back at her house, we played the new recording, and it was everything we needed. Emily's words were clear, deliberate, undeniable. Her arrogance was her downfall. When the final sentence played, her voice saying, "Once that's done, she won't have to worry about anything anymore," Linda let out a small, triumphant laugh. "That's it," she said. "That's the nail in their coffin." I leaned back, closing my eyes, letting the sound of Emily's voice fade into silence. I had what I needed. The next step was clear. I would take everything to Mr. Hernandez, the lawyer who had promised justice. But this time, I wouldn't just hand him evidence. I would hand him the story of a woman who refused to disappear. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, my heart steady and focused. Sunlight crept through the curtains, brushing against the notebook ID left open beside the bed. The words I had written the night before stared back at me. Proof is power. It wasn't poetry. It was truth. Every lie Emily had spoken, every silence Robert had allowed, was now sealed inside a tiny black recorder sitting in my purse. Today wasn't about pain anymore. It was about justice. Linda drove me downtown. The air between us, quiet but charged. She kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting over mine. A silent reassurance. I could feel the tremor beneath her calm. She was as nervous as I was. But neither of us said it aloud. When we arrived at Mr. Hernandez's office, I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. The building loomed above me, tall, glass, and unflinching, like the truth I was about to deliver. Mr. Hernandez greeted me with the same calm professionalism had shown before. But when I told him I had new evidence, his eyebrows lifted. I placed the recorder and my notes on his desk, every word labeled by date and time. He plugged in a small speaker, pressed play, And for the next 20 minutes, the room filled with Emily's voice, smooth, calculating, confident. Each sentence was a confession dressed in politeness. She talked about finalizing ownership, about how Robert will handle everything once she's gone, and how it'll be easier to manage the assets when she's not around. When the recording ended, Mr. Rate Epps lost one. Hernandez leaned back, his expression grim. He said quietly, "This isn't just manipulation. It's intent to defraud." He explained the process, how they had likely been preparing forged documents, how Emily's words could prove conspiracy, how the law would see through her charm once this reached court. I listened in silence, and the weight of his words settling deep into my chest. For months, I had felt powerless. Now, I could finally feel the ground beneath my feet again. He asked if I was ready to move forward. I nodded without hesitation. He began drafting the official complaint, explaining that we would also request a restraining order to prevent any further tampering with the property or my finances. I signed the necessary forms, my hand steady. It felt almost ceremonial, as if I were reclaiming not just my house but every piece of myself they had tried to erase. When I left the office, Linda was waiting by the door. She didn't need to ask how it went. She saw it in my face. I told her everything was in motion now, that it was only a matter of time. She smiled, proud but cautious. "Be ready," she warned softly. "People like her don't go down quietly." I knew she was right. Emily would fight, but she wouldn't win. Not this time. That night, back at Linda's, we opened a bottle of wine neither of us had touched in years. We toasted not to revenge, but to survival. She said something that stayed with me. "Sometimes justice is quiet, Martha. It doesn't roar, it waits. It builds. And when it arrives, it changes everything." Later, when she went to bed, I sat alone by the window, staring at the lights of the city. My thoughts drifted to Robert. I still couldn't reconcile the boy I raised with the man who had stood by and watched me be humiliated. A part of me still hoped he'd wake up one morning and realize what he had done. But hope was no longer my anchor, it was my lesson. Love, when given without boundaries, becomes a weapon others use against you. I took my phone and wrote a short message to Mr. Blacken. "Hernandez, I am ready whenever you are." Then I placed it face down on the table and watched the city stretch into night. Tomorrow would be the day everything began to turn. The evidence was ready. The law was on my side, and I had no more fear left to lose. Before going to bed, I whispered, into the quiet room. She changed the locks, but I hold the key now. And for the first time since this all began, I slept soundly. The morning of the confrontation arrived quietly, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I woke before the first light, the air still and heavy with anticipation. My clothes were laid out neatly on the chair, a simple cream blouse, dark trousers, and the small silver cross ID worn since the day Robert was born. It had always been a symbol of hope for me, but that morning it felt more like armor. I slipped it on, took a deep breath, and told myself that this day wasn't about revenge. It was about closure. Linda insisted on driving me. She didn't try to talk. She knew my mind was already where it needed to be. As we approached the house, my house, the sight of it stirred something deep inside me. The roses I had planted years ago were blooming again, stubbornly alive despite neglect. The irony made me smile. No matter how hard Emily tried to erase me, some things refused to die. We parked down the street, I sat for a moment, gripping my purse, the same purse that now held both my identification and a printed copy of the legal order Mr. Mariest Hernandez had prepared. My heart pounded. Not from fear, but from the weight of years coming to a head. When I finally stepped out of the car, the gravel crunched beneath my shoes like a heartbeat, keeping pace with my resolve. I walked up to the door and rang the bell. No hesitation this time. No trembling hands. The door opened, and Emily appeared, her face a mix of surprise and irritation. Behind her, I could see Robert standing in the hallway, pale, uncertain. Emily's smile was tight, forced. "You again," she said, her tone sharp beneath the sugar. "We told you." I raised my hand slightly, stopping her. "You told me a lot of things, Emily," I said evenly. "But today, it's my turn to speak." She frowned, stepping forward as if to block the doorway. But I didn't move. "I think you should leave before you embarrass yourself," she said coldly. "That's funny," I replied, my voice calm. "Because I was thinking the same thing about you." The color drained from her face. I reached into my purse and pulled out the document, holding it where she could see. "This," I said, "is a restraining order. And this," I held up the second page, "is proof that the property you tried to steal still belongs to me." For a moment, there was silence. Emily blinked, her mouth opening and closing, her practiced composure slipping away. "That's impossible," she stammered. We filed the paperwork." "Yes," I said softly. "You did. And you recorded yourself saying it." Robert's head snapped up. His face went pale. "Mom," he whispered. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and felt both heartbreak and release. "I didn't come here to fight," I told him. "I came here to end it." Emily lunged forward, her voice rising. "You think anyone's going to believe you? You're old, confused." Her words died in her throat as I pulled out the small recorder and pressed play. Her own voice filled the air smooth, confident, damning. "Once that's done, she won't have to worry about anything anymore." The sound echoed through the hallway, slicing through the silence. Robert took a step back, his eyes wide. Emily's face twisted, panic overtaking her arrogance. "You recorded me," she hissed. "I recorded the truth," I said quietly. "Something you've never been able to speak." She reached for the recorder, but I held it firm. "Touch me again," I said, my tone steady as a knife. "And the next person you'll see is a police officer." Right on cue, a car pulled up outside. Mr. Hernandez stepped out with a uniformed officer beside him. Emily froze, her breath catching as the officer approached the door. The lawyer greeted me politely, then turned to her. "Mrs. Adams?" he said, his voice calm but firm. "We have reason to believe you've attempted property fraud. You and your husband will need to come with us to answer some questions." Robert stared at the floor, his shoulders shaking slightly. Emily tried to speak, to twist her words into excuses, but nothing came. The officer guided them outside, their voices fading down the driveway. I didn't watch them go. I simply stood in the doorway, feeling the weight of years lift from my chest. Linda appeared beside me, her eyes wet with quiet pride. "You did it," she whispered. I nodded, my gaze sweeping across the familiar space. It wasn't the same house I had left, but it was mine again. I stepped inside, the floor creaking softly under my feet, as if welcoming me home. That evening, after everyone had gone, I sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the trees. The roses caught the sprattly friven last light, glowing like embers. I thought about Robert, how love and disappointment could live in the same breath. I knew I might never fully forgive him. But I also knew this story was no longer about loss. It was about reclaiming everything they thought I couldn't. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "They changed the locks, but I kept the key." The next morning, the world felt still in a way it hadn't for months. I woke up in my own bed, and for a few moments, I just lay there listening to the quiet hum of the house. The sound of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the pipes, the kind of small, ordinary noises I used to take for granted. I reached out and ran my hand across the sheets, feeling the smooth fabric beneath my fingertips. This was more than comfort. It was victory. The home I had built, the one they had tried to steal, was finally mine again. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the memories. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and disinfectant, reminders of Emily's attempt to erase me. But underneath it all was something stronger, my presence. No matter how hard she had tried, she couldn't scrub me out of the foundation. My laughter had soaked into these walls. My love had built them. I stopped in the kitchen, where the morning sun was spilling across the table, and made myself coffee. The first sip brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't the taste that made me emotional, it was the peace. Later that morning, Mr. Hernandez stopped by with the final paperwork. The house, he confirmed, was legally secured in my name again. Emily and Robert had been questioned, and though the legal process would continue for weeks, their fraud was undeniable. Emily had broken first, blaming confusion, claiming she had misunderstood the documents. Robert had barely spoken. The disappointment I felt was heavy, but not as sharp as before. It had dulled into something I could finally let go of. When Mr. Hernandez left, Linda arrived. She carried a basket of pastries and 2 cups of coffee, smiling in that quiet, proud way only a true friend can. We sat on the porch together, the same porch where I had once stood broken. This time, I was whole. She asked if I wanted to stay in this house, or sell it and start somewhere new. I looked out at the roses blooming along the fence, the same ones that had survived neglect and still found a way to grow. "No," I said, softly. "This house is part of me. Keep it. But make it mine again. In every way." We spent the afternoon cleaning. We took down the sterile gray curtains Emily had hung and replaced them with lace ones Linda had kept from years ago. We dusted the shelves, rearranged the furniture, and filled the space with laughter and music. By sunset, the house felt alive again. My house. My story. That night, when Linda went home, I sat alone on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The sky above me was deep purple, stars faintly blinking through the quiet. I thought about Robert. Somewhere inside me, I still wished he'd come back. Apologize. Tell me, had been blinded by someone else's greed. But whether he ever did or not, I knew I'd survive. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't for him. It was for me. I stood, walked to the door, and looked at the new lock glinting in the porch light. It was one I had chosen, this time solid brass. strong, and shining. I turned the key slowly. Listening to the click that had once broken me now sound like closure. Inside, the lights glowed warm, soft, safe. I whispered into the still air. You can rebuild a house after it's broken, 40. You can even rebuild a heart. Before going to bed, I wrote one final line in my notebook. She changed the locks and took my home. But I took back my life. I closed it, placed it on the nightstand, and turned off the light. For the first time in a long time, I slept without fear because this time, no one could ever take what was mine again. In the weeks that followed, the house and I healed together. Slowly at first, then with a kind of quiet momentum that felt like spring pushing through hard ground. And each small ritual became a stitch, closing an old wound. Like brewing coffee at dawn with the window cracked just enough to let the morning in. Or sweeping the porch while the neighborhood woke up around me. Or trimming the roses that had stubbornly bloomed through neglect and were now soft proof that resilience can be beautiful. And I began to reclaim the rooms, the way a person reclaims breath after a long dive. Not with a dramatic gasp, but with steady, patient inhales that say, I am still here. And I noticed how the light moved across the living room wall at noon and remembered how I used to pause there on lunch breaks. And I put my parents' photograph back above the mantel. And I set out the ceramic bowl Robert made in 3rd grade with its crooked edge and permanent thumbprint. And I let myself love it again without apologizing for the ache it carried. Because life had taught me that ache and gratitude can sit side by side without canceling each other. And with each day I allowed myself to live more in the present than in the courtroom of what-ifs. Even as the legal process continued in the background, steady and methodical like a clock that never needed me to watch it to keep time. And Mr. T. Hernandez sent updates that were measured and reassuring. And Linda kept showing up with her grocery totes and practical wisdom. And the officer who first stepped onto my porch called once to say the file was moving. And I thanked him with a calm that surprised me. Because the wild, bright anger that had fueled my fight had settled into something cleaner than anger. Something like dignity. And on a quiet Sunday, I sat at the kitchen table and rewrote my will with clear eyes and a steady hand. Not as a warning to anyone, but as a promise to myself. Naming a scholarship fund in my parents' honor. Setting aside a portion for a shelter that helped women restart their lives. And leaving the house to no person but to a trust that would guard it from being used as a weapon. And I signed those papers with a pen that felt heavier than ink. And afterward I walked the hallway slowly and touched the walls as if blessing them. And I decided I would keep the new lock. Not as a symbol of fear, but as a reminder that boundaries are a form of love too. That you can care for people and still ask them to knock. And I thought of Robert then with a softness that did not excuse him, but did not poison me either. Because I had learned that forgiveness is not a key handed to someone who broke your door. Forgiveness is standing in your doorway without bitterness and choosing not to carry their choices any farther. And I understood that if he ever came back with real contrition and real work to do, the conversation would happen on my terms. Around a table I set. Beneath a ceiling I paid for. In a life I rebuilt with my own hands. And if he never came, I would still be complete. And on the first truly warm afternoon of June, I hosted a small gathering on the porch. Just neighbors and Linda, and a couple of women from the bakery where I used to mop floors before sunrise. And we ate simple food and laughed the kind of laughter that rises from relief. And someone asked what it felt like to win. And I said it did not feel like winning at all. It felt like alignment. Like a picture, finally hanging straight after years of tilting. And that night after the Cynicspersten 119 in.com, plates were washed, and the porch was quiet again. I sat with my notebook and wrote down the lessons I wished I had learned earlier, but was grateful to learn at all. That love without boundaries invites trouble. That kindness is not agreement. That silence can be misread as surrender. That age does not mean weakness. That the law can be a bridge when your voice is tired. That the right friends are worth more than any deed. And I wrote one more line at the bottom and underlined it twice. That peace is a home you build inside yourself first. And from there it fills the rooms. And in the following days, I noticed small changes that signaled a future opening rather than closing. Like sleeping through the night without jolting awake at imagined footsteps or absent keys. Like humming while watering the plants. Like buying new curtains, not to erase the past, but to brighten the present. And, in the mirror, I saw a woman who looked like me, and also looked new. A woman who had stopped living as a supporting character in other people's plans. And I realized that the most epic way to take back what is yours is not only to recover property or names on paper, but to recover the voice you lowered too often. The spine you bent too far. The time you gave away without keeping a piece for yourself. And on the day, the final letter arrived from Mr. Hernandez confirming that all filings were complete and the case stood resolved beyond dispute. I placed it in a folder marked Keep and slid it into the back of a drawer. Not on display. Not hidden. Just there in its rightful place. And I brewed tea and sat on the steps and watched the street glow with evening. And a boy on a bike laughed the way Robert once laughed. And I let the sound cross the yard without breaking me. And I told the setting sun a simple truth. I had earned the slow way. That locks can be changed, and keys can be copied, and names can be shuffled on documents. But a life built with honest work and stubborn hope remains yours when you decide it is yours. And as the first stars appeared, I closed my eyes and thanked every version of myself who kept going, when standing still would have been easier. And I went inside and turned off the porch light and felt the house breathe with me. Steady and safe. And I knew that whatever came next would meet a woman who could hold her ground without shouting. Who could open her door without fear. Who could love without losing herself again.